But yeah, I'm a little afraid of what's going to happen, whether they win or lose. I'm planning on not really leaving the house today.
Now's when you can get away with crimes, though. You got to prepare for that.
This is your golden opportunity.
It's very quiet outside right now. So after this is done, I'm planning on going out and doing grocery shopping and driving around. Anything that involves traffic, the other.
Let's go do some crimes.
Yeah.
You should do some crimes.
Yeah, you should eat some sushi and not pay for it.
Yeah.
And then burn down the sushi establishment.
Yes. Now we're talking.
Right.
Welcome to I'd Buy That for $1, a podcast about inexpensive, common, and underappreciated records that are waiting to be rediscovered. I'm your host, Sean Hartman, Director of Tourism and Business Development for Hammond, Louisiana, where we love to say, we are not just the place from that Roches song.
That's an interesting PR approach.
You got to start somewhere.
Well, I could use some PR myself, guys. I'm co-host Jeremy. I applied for a job at a restaurant, and this rude owner, Mr. Selleck, he says to me, "We don't need any damned old dogs." And I cried and I left. I wept. I got all over the steam table.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, Jeremy. I know you're always looking for new occupations.
That's true.
Happens frequently. Well, I am co-host Peter Cook, and I'm in trouble here. I looked down, and I'm realizing now that we're going to be talking about the Roches. These are my notes for the Johnny Hammond episode. I got confused with Hammond song. I got all these notes on the B3 Hammond organ.
Well,
You are always so confused, Peter.
yeah, thanks for sharing your troubles with us.
Oh, wow. We can't play all these songs. We can't feature all these songs that we're referencing in this intro here.
Well, sounds like it might be quitting time, am I right?
Yeah.
I think we can.
Oh. Who else do we have here?
Hi, I'm Taylor Rowley, and as a point of interest, I spell my last name Rowley, and I don't give out my age or my phone number.
It's good to get that out in front. Let people know what to expect.
Yeah.
We are Sean and Jeremy and Peter and Taylor.
Yes.
For this episode of I'd Buy That for $1. Welcome back, Taylor. 6th time on. And
yeah.
It's an album that I think you were meant to come onto the podcast and talk to us about. What did you bring us?
I'm thrilled to be on this episode talking about this album, which is one of my very favorites, thrift store or otherwise. It is the 1979 album, self-titled album by the Roches.
Correct. On Warner Brothers.
Yes.
The major release, but kind of found a cult audience, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. They kind of were briefly in the mainstream and kind of existed on the outskirts of it for the rest of their career.
Yeah. And we'll talk more about that, but how about we give them a little taste of the Roches? Where do we want to start?
We are going to hear the first side, or the first track off the first side of the record called We. And I think the song, they speak for themselves. We'll let them introduce who they are.
Yeah, we won't need to do a bio for this episode. They're going to tell us the whole thing, their whole story, at least up to the point of their debut as a trio. So, all right, let's do that. Side A, track 1.
We are Maggie and Terry and Suzy. Maggie and Terry and Suzy Roach. We don't give out our ages, and we don't give out for 10 years. And now a trio we are, born on the 4th of December. We come from deep West New Jersey, diddly-lee. But now we live in New York City. We better get out of there before the shit hits the fan. Shit hits the fan. You might say, where have they played? All over the country and in England. Who have we worked with? Do we know anybody famous? Anybody famous? Do we know anybody famous? Anybody famous? And as a point of interest, we spell our last name R-O-C-H-E. We come from deep West New Jersey, but now we know in New York City. We better get out there before the shit hits the fan.
We have not, to my knowledge, my recollection, had a song on the podcast with an obscenity prior to this. You know, we just last episode, Todd Rundgren had a song about the shit hitting the fan, but we didn't feature that song. I believe Sean did put that on the exclusive monthly playlist that is now available on our Patreon, that Todd Rundgren song. But
I did.
Here the Roches are. You did do that, Sean?
Yeah, right next to Temporary Secretary.
Nice. By Paul McCartney. But here the Roches are dropping the S-bomb on us in the opening track.
Filthy.
And yeah, you know, it's a kitschy, wonderful introduction to the Roches.
Yeah, I think it really establishes their sense of humor.
If you didn't like that, though, let me just say to the listeners, because this was my first time hearing the Roches, and when that song played, I was like, okay, that's kind of silly, but I don't like this yet.
Mm-hmm.
But wait for it. It's coming.
Yeah. Yeah. That emphasizes sort of the vaudevillian aspect of their existence.
Totally. They toe the line very well between being like, let me just say that I'm on record as saying that I cannot stand what I call funny music.
Same.
And I hate it. I hate it all. Tenacious D, like Fly to the Conchords, like, I mean, anything like that where there's just jokes and stuff I don't like. And I think they toe the line between being a little obnoxious and being like very witty and endearing.
Yeah, I was going to say they have a very endearing brand of humor, because I as well have a very limited tolerance for humor in music. I think I just sold most of my vocal Frank Zappa records recently.
Yeah.
But this one, I still like it. I mean, there's a couple songs that I don't love as much as the others, but overall, I think their whole aesthetic works really, really well, and they do toe the line.
Yeah. And I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves here, but they were whoever laid out the sequencing on this record, the track listing, was very smart to follow the song up with the song we'll be talking about soon, because then you're just like, if you had any, fears that it was going to be all like that, they're quickly dashed.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when I first listened to this album a couple years ago, it was definitely after the pandemic had hit. And I knew the Roches' name, and one morning, it was when I first had to start going back into the office after a couple months of working from home. And just one morning, halfway on my way to work, I was like, who are the Roches? I kind of know the era they're from. I know that they're siblings, but I couldn't think that I'd ever heard their music knowingly. And I put this album on, and that's the first thing I heard. And I was like, okay, they're telling me all about themselves, so I'm learning things about them. But then, yeah, you get through this opening track and you get into the album and the song that we're going to feature next, and suddenly you're in a whole new world, an experience. a whole new experience, musical and beyond, it feels like. And yeah, they created, they carved out their own space. There wasn't really anyone contemporary to them in the late 70s, early 80s that I can think of, on at least on a little more high profile level, doing what they were doing.
Especially women.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
So, yeah. So should I talk a little bit about their background?
Yeah. Who are, beyond Maggie and Terry and Suzy, who are the Roches?
Okay. So Maggie, Terry, and Suzy Roche are a trio of sisters. They are originally from Park Ridge, New Jersey. And they grew up singing together as children and teenagers. When Maggie and Terry were in high school, Maggie is the eldest, and she is the one with the very distinctive contralto voice in the group. She's the eldest, and Terry, who is the second eldest, they left high school to become musicians. This is like in the late 60s. They spent a few years kind of going around the coffee house circuit. I guess at one point around then in the early 70s, they barged into a songwriting class that was being taught at NYU, that was being taught by Paul Simon, who Maggie Roche has said is her biggest influence. And they pretty much demanded that, that he allow them in the class, which he did. I guess he was pretty taken with their songwriting skills, because then he took an interest in them. He invited them to sing with him on a track called Was a Sunny Day on his record There Goes Rhyme and Simon, which I think is 73. Am I right? And then I guess I'm right.
Sure.
But then no one agreed or disagreed. And then he also, a couple years later, produced a few tracks on Terry and Maggie's record called Seductive Reasoning. Suzy was not in the group yet.
Yeah, she's several years younger than
Yes. And so
Maggie and
so he produced it, and he sang or played guitar on it. That album was on Columbia, and unfortunately it didn't really go anywhere. And right after it was released, and it was clear that the record label didn't know what to do with it, and they were pretty disheartened by the entire experience. They were like, we're not going to promote this album anymore. They moved to Hammond, Louisiana, which we'll talk more about soon. They had met a friend on their travels who had a kung fu school down there. So I think they were either living there or working there. And they started, developing more of their craft as songwriters. Eventually they moved back to New York, where Suzy was then taking acting classes. And the three of them decided to start singing Christmas carols on the street, busking, and developed sort of a following doing that, and started playing at venues like Folk City, where they were discovered by, a couple people. Linda Ronstadt and Phoebe Snow went and saw them play, and then a week later they performed their song Married Men, which we'll also talk about. They performed that on SNL together, and that really introduced the world to the Roches. And then later that year they were on SNL, like in November, I think.
Oh, you're saying Phoebe Snow performed Married Men?
Phoebe Snow and Linda Ronstadt went and saw the Roches play at Folk City, and then they performed only a week later, Phoebe and Linda, the Married Men, on SNL. And then 6 months later, the Roches were on SNL.
Yep. Okay.
Mostly because of that, performance. Robert Fripp also saw them perform at Folk City. They didn't even know who he was, and he asked to be introduced to them. And then he produced and played on the record.
Yeah, Robert Fripp of King Crimson.
Yes, exactly.
Far out. Wow.
Yeah, not the most expected choice for production on this album.
Not at all.
But I think
it makes sense to me.
It does make sense in a way, especially if you're more familiar with some of the stuff Robert Fripp was doing outside of King Crimson. And I've read in some interviews that the Roches said that was the best producer they ever worked with, and he seemed to understand and appreciate their songwriting more so than anyone else.
Mm-hmm. I could see that.
Yeah, he came back for their third album as well.
Yes.
And produced that.
He did.
I also wanted to jump in with a note on the Paul Simon class. It was something of a master class that I believe only 10 people were allowed to take part in, and it was something that you had to submit for, and then winners were selected. So then the Roches just busted into this semi-private master class, played a song for Paul Simon, and he was so impressed that he then had them sing on his record. They seem to have
Yeah.
a knack for just instantly charming other musicians like that.
I read that after that class, he drove them home to New Jersey, and he asked them if they thought that they were as good as Paul McCartney, and they said yes.
That's amazing.
And he was really impressed by that, and I think that's why he, really supported them in their career.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
I like this album more than almost all Paul McCartney songs I've ever heard. So
Wow.
bold
Dang.
statement.
Dang, it has humor in it, and Jeremy still likes it more.
True.
Yeah, that is high praise.
Okay, so we are going to hear a song. It sounds like it's based on their experiences. It was written by Maggie Roche, the eldest, about her and Terry's experience in Hammond, Louisiana, after Seductive Reasoning came out, and it's called the Hammond Song.
All right, let's do that. Side A, track 2.
If you go down to Hammond, you'll never come back. In my opinion, you're on the wrong track. We'll always love you, but that's not the point. If you go with that fella, forget about us. As far as I am concerned, that would be just throwing yourself away, not even trying. Come on, you're lying to Well, I went down to Hammond.
For me personally, that song was a revelation once it kicked on. I was kind of on the fence, like, don't like funny music. This better not be some, like, They Might Be Giants shit. Like, I'm not here for that. And then this song came out and it, like, straight up moved me. I was like, wow.
Yeah, I think I've never met anyone who isn't completely taken by that song. Like, of people who like all different kinds of music, if they hear that, they're like, that song is so great. And it's just amazing.
Yeah, it's an all-timer for sure.
Universally beloved.
I'd put that up against any Paul McCartney song. Said it right here.
Yeah, it has so much going on. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, and it's cryptic lyrically in a very beautiful way.
Well, they're sort of telling a story from two sides of the coin. It's like sort of a conversation between I would get, I guess like maybe a parental figure and a young person, I would say.
I had read one interpretation that it's actually 3 perspectives. It's the parents,
Oh.
and then it's the sister that was pursuing a love interest, and then it's the other sister's perspective on the thing. And the idea is to just give you this complete universal perspective on an event, showing that it affects different people in different ways.
Yeah. It's a great how they divide up the vocal on it too. It helps watching them live, them perform that live helps me understand the distinction between their different voices, with Maggie with that low baritone contralto, and then Terry up high, and then Suzy kind of right in the middle.
Yeah.
I also really love the guitar solo on there from Robert Fripp. It's very tasteful. It blends really well with the vocals. I was reminded a little bit of Ernie Isley's guitar work on the Isley Brothers record we did, where he's just really good at harmonizing with vocals using the guitar as a lead instrument.
Yeah. On that one, Robert Fripp is credited as electric guitar on the album, but that one specifically, it is fripperies is how he's credited.
And what are fripperies?
I believe it's the effect that he's using. Is it like tape delay that he's using to create that sound?
I don't know what the whole thing is. I know that there's probably like books and articles about frippatronics and
right.
all the different techniques and effects he was using. But the basics of it is that he viewed non-traditional guitar playing and effects and manipulation as just as important as the guitar playing, and would often utilize those functions to create more like synthesizer-like sounds than traditional guitar work.
There's also the intro that fades in, which I'm wondering is that their voices layered in the intro before Maggie's acoustic guitar comes in. There's that fade in note that's a long extended. It almost sounds like their voices blended in a style not unlike 10cc's I'm Not in Love.
Well, I see on Discogs that Maggie Roche is credited with synthesizer as well, so I assume that there was synthesizer and vocals being blended together at the beginning.
To my understanding, that's only on Quitting Time, the synthesizer.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Do you know who programmed the synthesizer on this album for Maggie?
I don't.
A fellow by the name of Larry Fast.
Oh, Larry Fast.
Do we remember who Larry Fast is?
Synergy, yeah.
Yeah, one of our earliest episodes with our guest Katie May. Larry Fast is Synergy. He programmed the synth.
Which makes sense because he was in a band with Tony Levin, who's the bass player from King Crimson and also played bass on this record.
Yep, Tony Levin from King Crimson. He also played with Peter Gabriel and Herbie Mann and many other people. We mentioned him previously on our Weather Report episode because he played the Chapman stick.
Yep.
And yeah, I didn't realize just how much session work Tony Levin had done. He's on all kinds of stuff. You saw right around this time he was on John Lennon and Yoko Ono's Double Fantasy album.
Interesting.
On percussion, we have someone we talked about on our Daryl Hall and John Oates episode, the legendary Jimmy Malin, or however you say his name. We didn't know then either, and I couldn't find out for this episode. Maelen. He's on Triangle and Shaker. You can hear some triangle in that in Hammond song that we just listened to. And he was the first call percussion player in New York City for many years through the 70s and 80s. He was on, as I said, Private Eyes by Hall & Oates. He also often contributed percussion to the extended 12-inch single versions of songs, like we just talked about that whole phenomenon on the Heatwave episode about the extended 12-inch versions will add in stuff, and it's actually the extended version of What a Fool Believes. He's the additional percussion on that by the Doobie Brothers.
I also just want to state that he has one solo record with a very wonderful punny title. It's called Beats Workin', but that's Beats because he's a percussionist.
Oh yeah, Sean's always a big fan of the solo album pun titles.
Yeah, I have no idea if that album's good or not. It probably is, but it's an excellent title at least.
But overall, there's not many players on this album. We've pretty much covered it. And this is produced by Fripp. It says audio verite, meaning that Taylor, I'm sure you're familiar with cinema verite.
Of course.
Yeah. So it's the idea of, isn't it the idea of kind of capturing something as it is rather than manipulating it too much?
Yes. And I did read that he would tell them, just go work on these songs really, really hard and then come in and just play them as you would, and they said that that worked really, really well for them. That wasn't a way that they had recorded before, the usual standard, just laying tracks. They didn't do it like that for this record.
Yeah. So we're hearing a very immediate sounding recording. This is what the Roches sound like.
Yeah. And I read that everything was done in 1 or 2 takes.
Incredible. They're just, their harmonies are unbelievably tight. And of course, we've talked about before their siblings, so it's that blood harmony. Mm-hmm. I think they're one of the best examples of that.
Definitely.
Some reviews, and of course we know critics are assholes, but some people criticize them as not being particularly great vocalists from a traditional standpoint, and I have no sense of what great traditional vocals are. To me, they're among the most profound voices I've ever heard, especially all together.
I agree.
It's very affecting, yeah. To me, I don't listen to it and think, oh, is this technically perfect or not? It's very emotionally affecting. And the other thing I think about with this group is that aside from the blood harmony of the vocals, just the fact that they're siblings gives you this voyeuristic, for lack of a better word, feeling with it. You feel like you're getting allowed to peek into this private family life of these quirky, interesting people. Yeah, it's an interesting effect. It kind of reminds me almost of some of the outsider music, maybe the Shags, but the Shags with a little bit more stable and a lot more musical talent. But it's that same kind of peek into their private lives kind of feel.
When I first showed this group to a friend of mine, Nate Hartman, who's now a supporter of ours, he said, and my first reaction was, wow, the Shags got really good.
All right, so I'm not alone in thinking that then. Okay, cool.
Well, yeah. Also their ranges are so different that I think it sounds different than in most sibling groups, I think, because I don't know. No one has a voice like Maggie Roche. I mean, no woman does. That's crazy. Yeah. I've never heard a woman sing like that.
No, it's really unique. She's the one that you can hear her very distinctly on Hammond's song when she says "on the wrong track," kind of towards the beginning. And then you start to pick out her voice when they're all harmonizing more and more, and you're like, oh yeah, it's in there. But Terry and Suzy they have such different voices that Suzy, I actually found, tends to a lot of the times be the one leading. I've actually learned from watching performances of them, melodically, that is.
Yeah, she's usually in the middle too. Mm-hmm. I've read that because she doesn't play an instrument, it's Terry on guitar and also Maggie on guitar. She's kind of considers herself the MC of the group. Mm-hmm. If you watch her live performances, you can definitely see that.
Yeah, Terry does more of the lead work. And every so often, Suzy will pick up a guitar, but Maggie's doing the rhythm, Terry's doing the lead, and then, Suzy's often standing there without a guitar.
Mm-hmm. I really like watching her. She's very theatrical, maybe because she was studying acting, but she does a really good job of making up for the fact that she doesn't play an instrument typically.
Yeah, and she's married to Loudon Wainwright III.
They actually were never married, but they do have
a child. Oh, they're not married?
No, but they had a child together, Lucy Wainwright Roche.
Yeah.
Who is the half sibling, if you want to get into this, which I will, because I find it very interesting, is Suzy Roche and Loudon Wainwright III had a child together. That's Lucy Wainwright Roche, who is half siblings with Martha Wainwright and Rufus Wainwright from Loudon Wainwright III's prior marriage to Kate McGarrigle, who was in the McGarrigle sisters, who are great, and they're very similar to the Roches in that way. So it's very And Rufus Wainwright went on to have a he's gay, and he and his husband went and they have a daughter with Leonard Cohen's daughter.
Yeah.
But yeah, they share a daughter together, and it's just this major sort of weird late 70s folk dynasty that I think would make an excellent documentary or biopic.
Yeah. Yeah, we haven't covered a Loudon Wainwright III album yet. I've entertained the idea a few times, but his stuff's pretty weird.
Yeah, see, that's getting to a little... I like him a lot because, I mean, if only for the swimming song. That song's so great. Yeah, he gets a little too much into the funny for me. And it's dark, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, but I think that it's just, yeah, they were all in that scene, I guess. Anyway.
Yeah, very specific little niche in the music industry. Well, Taylor, what happens to the Roches after this album? This is just their debut.
So yeah, they had this record. It did really well. I think the New York Times and other publications were calling it the best album of the year when it came out. It was only April. It was released in April 1979, so they were calling it that even at that point. They did well. They toured a lot, and they were on TV a bunch. If you go on their website, by the way, whoever was running that, it's one of the sisters, but they are did a very good job of chronicling their TV performances, which you can watch a lot of them on their website. So they were on The Late Show. They were on Dick Cavett's show. That interview is really fun. They're really good together. Because he's he's so funny, and I think gets them more than anyone else that they interviewed with. But then after that, they released a lot of records. I think maybe 4 or 5 in the 80s, all of which I think are great. And yeah, like you said, Robert Fripp produced their 3rd record, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, he did not produce Nerds, their 2nd album.
Yeah. None of them did as well as this one. And I think eventually they were kicked off their label. And then they continued making music through the 90s. And then I think maybe in the late 90s they decided okay, let's put a stop to this. And then they kind of are all doing their own thing, performing maybe as duos and solo, but never together again publicly. I did want to say though that Suzy Roche was an actress as well. Didn't do too many things, but she's in this movie called Crossing Delancey, which I love. It's directed by a woman named Joan Micklin Silver, and it's from 1988. And Suzy Roche has a supporting role in that, and she's so funny and so good. And the Roches did the soundtrack to it.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, and it's great.
Yeah, sadly, Maggie is no longer with us.
Yeah, so that's another story I have. So I work I'm a music supervisor, as I've told your audience many times now. But I was working on a show with Tiffany Anders, who's the woman I work with, and I'm her coordinator on her projects. But we were working on a show called You're the Worst back in 2016, and we wanted to use the Hammond song in a scene. And, I looked up who owned the rights, and you do that on this website called BMI or ASCAP, and it lists who the publisher is. A lot of times it's a major label, but this time it just had an email address, and we emailed and we're like, we'd like to use your song, get in touch with us. We can go over the details. And Maggie Roche wrote us back. And this was in December of 2016. So we were both Tiffany and I are fans. We're thrilled, that we got to actually interact with her. And she was very lovely and, and nice. And so, yeah, we used the song in an episode. And then only a month later, we had no idea, but she had cancer and she died within 3 weeks of us talking to her.
Wow.
It was, yeah. And I was so sad. But yeah, I guess she's a very private person, according to her sisters, and no one knew that except her family. Yeah.
Yeah, and sadly, her son Felix McTeague, who was also a musician, died in 2020, just a few years after she passed away. So,
that's very sad. I did not know that.
Yeah, I just learned that in researching. There wasn't a lot of information out there about it, but I did find that. So yeah, but Terry and Suzy, are still with us.
Yeah, I think they're still performing. You know, I follow the Roches on Facebook. I think it's ran by Suzy. So they post, you know, occasionally they're performing. One of them will be performing at some small venue out where they live, like in the East Coast. They never get out here ever, which makes me
Out
sad.
to LA.
I've always wanted to see them. Yeah, I always watch out for it, but they never do.
Well, I think it's high time to feature the next selection, which is The Married Men. We talked about previously that Phoebe Snow had a version of this, that recorded a version of this song. And it's probably, because of that, one of the better known Roches songs. This is The Married Men. Side B, track 2.
One in Louisiana, one who travels around. One of them mainly stays in Heartthrob Town. I am not their main concern, they are lonely too. I am just an arrow passing through. When they look into my eyes, I know what to do. I make sure the words I say are true. When they send me off at dawn, pay the driver my fare. They know I am going down somewhere. Oh, the married men, the married men never would have had a good time again if it wasn't for the married men. One says he'll come after me, another one will drop me a line. Drop her a line. One of them says all my agony is in my mind. In her mind. They know what is wrong with me. None of them.
It makes sense to me that Phoebe Snow would pick that song to cover because some of the way they deliver the vocals actually kind of remind me of the way that Phoebe Snow sings. It's a real natural fit there. So Phoebe would have had a hit with that less than a year before this record came out. She covered it in 1978.
Yeah. I don't love that version that she has on her record. It's a little too jaunty for me.
Yeah, that's not my favorite Phoebe Snow record in general, honestly.
But the way that she and Linda Ronstadt sing it on SNL is it's much more in line with the Roches version. I think that version's really beautiful.
Yeah, this one starts with Maggie singing the lead on the first verse, and then Suzy is the second verse. And of course, yeah, Maggie, it almost has this like Irish folk ballad quality to it. And of course, this is an example of the Roches sometimes have this sort of coy, winking aspect to their music, and this is definitely in that vein.
Yeah, and they mention Louisiana again, so this makes me think that if we didn't already suspect, I think that this is probably autobiographical.
Yeah.
Because, yes, as we mentioned before, they had spent some time in Louisiana before this record came out.
Yeah, they deal with interesting topics that you don't necessarily hear about in a lot of songs.
Yeah, they're very personal. They're not, I feel like they're very accessible, but they're not very broad. in terms of their themes.
Like they're not necessarily universal themes. They're not
Yeah,
necessarily...
exactly. Yeah, they're just like, they're based on experience, their experience. They're like sort of little character driven, like short stories almost.
Yeah, and if you watch live performances, they'll sometimes tell a little bit of a story of how the song came to be or something that happened as a result of the song too. Sometimes it's after the fact the song affected people this way. And that's they kind of have that, it's casual vaudevillian quality to their performances. I really have to think that being a fan of theirs in like the late 70s, early 80s must have felt like you were in on the best kept secret around, like this real intimate feeling of getting into this group. Because they put it all out there, like you said, but it's also cryptic at the same time and very specific.
Yeah, for sure.
Did you guys find music like this music for others?
Well, I mentioned them earlier, but I think Kate and Anna McGarrigle are a good comparison to the Roches, not only because of their familial ties, but they were also sisters recording music in the late 70s with the folk pop aspect to it, with a lot of harmony. And I think their approach to their lyrics is pretty similar. So yeah, their self-titled record, Kate and Anna McGarrigle, has a song on it actually called Heart Like a Wheel, which Linda Ronstadt also covers. So full circle there. Yeah, I suggest that. I mean, even though we were kind of ragging on Loud and Wainwright III, I think his album Attempted Mustache is really good, and it also has a great title.
I don't know if I want to. Yeah, I like Loud and Wainwright III, and I respect him, but his humor stuff just doesn't quite work for me like it does with the Roches.
Mm-hmm. Well, that one, I do think that one has a few good songs on it.
Yeah.
And let's see. I was thinking about this record. It's actually one that I've considered bringing to the table for a future episode, maybe. It's by this guy named Steve Forbert, and it's called Jackrabbit Slim from 1979 also.
I've seen that around, but I have never listened
it's
to
good.
it. Okay.
It's really good. It has a song on it called Romeo's Tune. That's really awesome. And he's doing sort of a similar thing too. So those are the three that came to my mind. Oh, also, I wanted to mention, sorry to keep going back and forth, but Terry Roche was also on Robert Fripp's album, Exposure, in 1980, I think.
Oh,
she
cool.
She sings on a few of those songs. And also, did you know that they were on a Philip Glass record?
Did not know that.
Which is crazy.
I didn't.
Whoa.
I hadn't
Yeah.
thought that either.
Yeah, they sing on a Philip Glass album from 1987, I think, that Laurie Anderson also sings on, which is just so crazy to me.
We should probably, while I'm thinking about it, mention that they were on Tiny Toon Adventures.
I just watched the clips from it this morning. It's like, who did they know? Is it just because of their last name and that's it? Or it's like, but what child would watch that? And no, they play. So yeah, the Roches play cockroach versions of themselves in this episode, but they're in the entire episode. It's the entire episode is about them.
Wow.
That's so strange.
Yeah, but what child would pick up on that joke?
Yeah. If you were a child watching that and that was somehow actually your introduction to the Roches and you're a fan now because of that, please tell us.
Well, it's like SpongeBob SquarePants was based on the album The Mollusk by Ween. And they even had a Ween song in the movie. Yeah.
Speaking of funny music,
It's just like what kid would pick up on that?
Well,
Yeah.
funny you should mention that because SpongeBob was definitely the first place I heard Tiny Tim.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, speaking of funny music, that can be
right.
quite polarizing.
That's wild. So back to recommended albums.
Yeah, Sean, did you have a few?
Yes.
Okay.
So we've mentioned Phoebe Snow a bunch of times and the record that we don't like of hers, but the one that I highly recommend is an album called Second Childhood from 1976. I've been wanting to do a Phoebe Snow record for a while. I think she's got some really cool songs, some not so great stuff, but when she's on, it's incredible. And then kind of a left field pick that I think works surprisingly well is the Pointer Sisters. We have another sister group that made some kind of vaudevillian, quirky music at times, but when they weren't doing that, they were making, disco and funk. They have a record called Steppin' from 1975 that is really cool. The first half is more of that like mid-70s funk, and then the second half gets into the like vaudevillian and show tunes influenced, and highly recommended. And then last one, Maria Muldaur's 1973 self-titled album has some
Is that
parallels.
Midnight at the Oasis on it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that
Midnight at
song.
the Oasis. That's a great album. The whole album is really
It is
good.
really
Yeah.
good. And I also just want to note that the Paul Simon masterclass that we mentioned, Maria was actually one of the people who had won a legitimate seat in that class. When the
Maria
Roches,
Muldaur?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, when the Roches busted in and started singing.
That's interesting because Maria Muldaur she performed with her husband, Jeff Muldaur. They had a couple records together before she went solo. So I wonder if those records came out before or after she took that
Well,
class.
and I guess it's possible that maybe she had been in like a different class that Paul had done if he did more than one. I just know that she had one entry to one of his songwriting classes that
Cool.
he did.
Okay.
And that's my list of recommended albums.
Fantastic. Thank you both. We would like to take a moment to say our Patreon push for February is over. Thank you to everyone who signed up or existing patrons who bumped up their tier. A lot of participation, and the window to receive the cool exclusive limited edition gifts has now closed, but you can still always sign up for our Patreon and support the podcast at patreon.com/I'd Buy That Podcast, or you can find the link in the show notes. Lots of cool content. If you like what you're hearing, there's more. There's more out there for you. But let's turn the focus to Taylor. Tell people where else they can hear you besides for I'd Buy That for $1, Taylor.
Well, you can hear my radio show every fourth Thursday on NTS Radio, on their app, which is, just go to your app store and download that, or you can go to nts.live, or you can hear it after the fact on my website, which is called it's windmillsofyourmind.org, which also happens to be the name of the radio show.
Yes.
And yeah, so I think if you like the Roches, you'll probably like my radio show.
Yeah, they probably have made a few appearances over the years.
I have. Yeah. And then, that's where you can hear me. And then I don't know if we want to talk about my work.
Yes, let's talk about your
Well,
work. Let's
okay.
specifically let's talk about your work as a music coordinator and a music supervisor.
Yeah. Well, I'll just push Pen 15 again because that's out. But the last season of Pen 15, I co-music supervised an episode on that. So if you haven't watched it yet, you should.
Yeah, that episode felt the most like a complete departure from the rest of the series to me, and it felt like a mini movie, almost like a mini film. I loved that episode. That was probably my favorite episode of the entire series.
Oh,
the one that's
cool.
about Maya's mother.
Mm-hmm.
And I paid attention to all the music that was happening, and just knowing the painstaking work that went into acquiring the rights to those obscure Japanese songs. Because you mentioned it the last time that you were on.
Yeah, I was living on Japanese Standard Time as well as Pacific Standard Time for a few months.
And then the closing episode of the series made me had to completely reconsider how I feel about the Santana Rob Thomas song "Smooth." It really did.
You and me both. I was never liked that song. Hated it when it came out. It felt like it was on the radio for years.
Yeah, it was. It was like standard that every 45 minutes it had to be played.
Yeah. And they wrote it into the script, I believe, and I was like, oh God, I can't. And then, I was still not convinced the entire time until I saw the episode, and I have a new affection. I have a affection for it, and it's not a new affection. It's just, I think that it works really well in the episode.
Yeah, and that last episode gets dark.
Very dark.
But it's a great show. Pen 15. It's available on Hulu.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it really one of my favorite shows of the last few years. So I'm so cool that you got to work on that show. I'm sure it was quite an experience.
Yeah, it was really fun.
I just started the second season recently, so I'm very excited to get to the Taylor episode and get to the finale and discover a new appreciation for Smooth. I was young enough when that song came out where I didn't necessarily love it, but I was just like, oh, this is a cool song, whatever. I think my dad bought that CD and we'd listen to it all the time in the car, so I wasn't old enough to be too cool for that song yet.
Ugh, I hated every song off that.
Yeah. That was a huge album, too. There were a number of hits off of it.
What's the other one? Like Maria, or whatever.
Yep, that one's on there.
You look just like a movie star. I hate that song.
And then he did like a sequel to it with more features, and I think he did a POD song on the sequel, and I was way into that.
I went, not to get to, like, we can just cut this, but I hadn't thought about POD in 20 years, and I was at the bowling alley with like bowling a couple weeks ago, and Youth of a Nation, is that a song by them?
Yeah,
came on, and I was like,
song, yeah.
I could not I have not thought of that song in 20 years. I couldn't believe I don't know that I have been able to forget a song so thoroughly.
I mean, there was pretty good reason to thoroughly forget that song.
But you know what? I was listening to it, and I was like, there's gonna be a trailer soon that uses that song, and it's gonna be sung by a woman in like a that sort of goth broken baby doll voice that is very popular in trailers now. Yeah, it'll probably be in like a trailer for Euphoria or something, right? Like,
or an action movie where it's like it's real edgy and atmospheric, and then it ends with the big action sequences perfectly timed up to the drum beats. That's exactly how it's going to go.
Yeah.
Can't wait.
It's going to be awesome.
Okay. All right. From the Roches to POD.
This is where I saw this episode going.
Cool. Well, what are we going to end with?
We are going to end with Quitting Time, fittingly. Mm-hmm. As we mentioned, this song features the synthesizer programmed by Larry Fast and played by Maggie Roche. It's kind of subtle, like a lot of the additional instrumentation on this. But yeah, this is a fitting closer. This is another album where it's so hard to choose just 4 to feature, because this album is a complete statement, and the sequencing is incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think this one shows off their harmonies very well.
Yeah. Yep, comes right in strong with them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have anything else to say about the Roches other than check them out if you like this album. Everything I've heard is good, and I still have plenty of their catalog to explore myself.
Yeah, I love Nerds. I love Keep On Doing. I love Speak and Another World. Those are all excellent, and I found every single Roches album that I own at a thrift store.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is definitely a very easy band to find in the bargain bin. So if you enjoyed this, you're in luck.
Yeah, I bought my copy at Vertigo in Grand Rapids 2 or 3 months ago for $5. So it's still out there cheap.
You paid too much?
Sean, there's inflation happening.
Doesn't exist. There's no inflation. It's just corporate greed at the record store.
Oh, no. Vertigo, you're cool with us. All right. Well, thank you so much, Taylor, for coming back yet again and talking about the Roches.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm Jeremy Ruggles. I'm punching out.
I'm
it's quitting time.
Sean Hartman. It's also quitting time, so I gotta go.
Yep, I'm Peter Cook. Gotta hit the road.
And I'm Taylor Rowley. I'm out.
Out.
Quitting time. Quitting time. Quitting time. Quitting time. Money is not the problem.